When Camille sat across from her father's attorney in the polished oak-paneled office, she already knew what was coming. She'd felt it for months, in the quiet hush of family dinners, in the way her younger brother Tyler had stopped making eye contact, and in the smug glint of her stepmother's smile. The will had been rewritten, and the primary estate, along with the Vineyard property, goes to Tyler Landon Walsh, the attorney read, each syllable slicing through the room like ice. Camille Renee Walsh will retain the personal items left in her mother's old apartment, as noted in Annex C. Camille blinked slowly. My mother's apartment? She repeated, her voice disturbingly calm. That's correct. Your father indicated those items were of sentimental value. He assumed that was most important to you. Of course he did. Sentimental value. That was always the code word for scraps. The leftovers you give to someone when you've already handed their inheritance to someone else. Camille nodded politely, stood up, and left without another word. As she walked through the hallway, her heels clicking on the marble like a ticking clock, she didn't cry. Not then, not yet. She'd expected this, but it still stunned her, how thoroughly her father had erased her. The man who once called her his clever little hawk had rewritten his legacy as if she'd never existed. And Tyler? Tyler had barely held back a smirk. Back in her car, she finally allowed herself to exhale. The city buzzed around her, cars honking, life continuing, unaware of the shattering that had taken place just minutes ago. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. Camille didn't go home. Instead, she drove to her mother's old apartment, the one she hadn't visited in 3 years. The key still worked, even though the building had grown older and wearier in her absence. Inside, the air was thick with dust and time. Her mother's paintings still hung crooked on the walls, and the couch still had that stubborn coffee stain from a fight about a boy she no longer remembered. She walked to the bedroom, opened the closet, and found the small safe buried under winter coats. Her fingers remembered the code before her mind did. Inside, a stack of old letters. One, in particular, sealed in a different kind of envelope. One she'd never seen before, was addressed in her mother's handwriting. To Camille, when the time is right. The letter was dated 9 months before her mother died. Camille, if you're reading this, I'm no longer here to tell you the truth myself. But you deserve it. You always did. Your father and I made mistakes. But what he did after I left? That wasn't just a mistake. It was betrayal. The vineyard was never his to give away. It was mine, and it should be yours. I've enclosed proof, documents, signed and notarized, and a key to a safe deposit box in Savannah under my maiden name. Don't let them win. Love, always, Mom. Camille sat there, letter in hand, the words burning in her chest like wildfire. Suddenly, she wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. She was an heir to a secret, and perhaps a war. The next morning, she stood outside a dull beige bank in Savannah, the letter folded in her coat pocket, her mother's key cool and sharp against her palm. Inside the safe deposit box, she found exactly what her mother had promised: legal deeds, old family records, tax filings, a certified letter from a lawyer dated 15 years ago, confirming that the vineyard had been inherited by Camille's mother from her grandfather, not acquired through her father's business. And something else. A small, worn notebook. It was filled with names, meetings, quiet payoffs, land transfers, and one phrase repeated over and over: he forged the second will. Camille stared at the page, the names spiraling in her head like falling dominoes. Her father hadn't just rewritten his will. He had rewritten history. She didn't go back home. She went to the courthouse. And then to her godmother, a retired attorney with a steel trap memory and a grudge against Camille's father that dated back to 1997. I knew he'd do something like this one day, the older woman muttered as she flipped through the documents. But this is a masterpiece of quiet corruption. Camille sat across from her, a quiet fire blooming behind her eyes. I don't just want justice, she said softly. I want him to watch as everything he built turns to dust. Her godmother looked up, a slow smile forming. Then you've come to the right place. The Broken Glass Between Us, Part 2. A story of inheritance, secrets, and silent revenge. Camille's father, Everett Walsh, believed in control, meticulously crafted, quietly enforced, and beautifully concealed. The vineyard was his pride, not for the wine it produced, he didn't even drink, but for the legacy it symbolized. Land, power, prestige, his name on bottles in boutique hotels, his face on the city council's donor wall, his name mentioned with reverence at charity galas. He had built a kingdom of whispers, but now the whisper he couldn't hear was hers. Camille didn't call him. She didn't send a letter or an email. She knew better. Men like Everett were immune to confrontation, practiced in deflection. Instead, she quietly hired an investigator, a lean, sharp-eyed woman named Jessa, who had once uncovered a bribery ring within the state's environmental board. Discretion was her art. "I'm not here to expose him," Camille said as they sat in the back of a quiet diner off a highway in Georgia. "Not yet. I'm here to understand what he did and how he covered it." Jessa smiled faintly, flipping open a weathered notepad. "Then we'll start with who signed off on the forged documents. If your mother's estate was unlawfully transferred, there's a paper trail. You just have to know where the ink ran cold." Meanwhile, back in Charleston, Tyler was celebrating. The Vineyard was hosting its annual Harvest Gala, and Tyler was now head of operations. In truth, he knew very little about wine or farming, but Everett had polished his son's role like a trophy, a handsome face for press releases, a name to carry the legacy. Camille wasn't mentioned once that night, but someone else was, briefly and quietly. A guest, an older man in a navy linen suit, asked Everett casually during a toast, "Didn't your daughter help run this place years ago?" Everett's smile never faltered. Camille's more of a dreamer, a good girl, but not rooted. Rooted. As if she hadn't spent 5 summers digging soil samples, running payroll, harvesting with bleeding palms while Tyler posted pictures with hashtags and rosé. Camille stared at her phone that evening, watching live-stream clips of the gala on social media. She watched her brother, drunk on inherited pride, talk to a journalist from Charleston Monthly, slurring half-truths about family legacy. "I wanted to preserve what Dad started," he said. "This isn't just a vineyard, it's our identity." Camille nearly laughed. "Our identity." She clicked save on the video. The following week, Jessa delivered results. "Your mother's ownership was stripped after she died," she explained, laying down a photo of a document with a signature Camille recognized, but knew wasn't real. Everett's. Forged. He backdated it, made it look like she relinquished her share to him right before her death, and then he transferred the vineyard to a holding company, which he slowly funneled into Tyler's name. Camille held the document up to the light. The signature was too smooth, too clean. "Is it enough to go to court?" she asked. Jessa nodded slowly. "It's enough to rattle the walls of his empire, but if you want to take everything, you'll need more than paper." Camille's voice was cold and certain. "Then let's rattle everything first." She started small. Anonymous tips sent to 2 local journalists. Questions posed in public forums. "Who really built the Walsh Vineyard empire?" one post asked on a popular Charleston gossip board. "Why was Everett Walsh's daughter left out of the will, despite running operations until 2018? She knew the Walsh name was made of glass. It looked solid, but the right vibration could shatter it. And the vibration came, faster than expected. A wine blogger posted a piece titled, "The Forgotten Walsh, Camille's Quiet Role in Charleston's Wine Boom." It went viral in less than 24 hours. Suddenly, Camille's name was in whispers again. But this time, she was listening. At the next city chamber meeting, Everett arrived to applause, as usual. But this time, 3 journalists waited by the parking lot. One held up a copy of the viral blog post. "Mr. Walsh, why was your daughter left out of the will?" Everett blinked. Did Camille help build the vineyard's early brand? His jaw tensed. No comment. But the seed was planted. Back home, Camille received a message request on Facebook. from an old vineyard manager, one who had quietly retired 2 years ago under unusual circumstances. I know what happened. I still have copies of the original ledgers. He paid off the notary. She stared at the message and smiled. That night, Camille stood alone in the old vineyard barn. No one knew she had the gate code. No one remembered this place, the old storage area that once housed rusted wine barrels and forgotten receipts. She stepped inside with a flashlight, her boots crunching on loose gravel. There, beneath a broken beam, was the trunk. Her grandfather's, the original owner of the land, the one who had taught her to recognize soil by scent, the man whose name had been scrubbed from every plaque. She opened the trunk. Inside, yellowed journals, maps, and one old photograph. Her mother, barely 22, standing with Camille as a toddler on her hip. Behind them, the first vines planted. This was the root Everett had severed, but roots grow back. The broken glass between us, Part 3. A story of inheritance, secrets, and silent revenge. The photograph haunted Camille in the best way. It sat now on her kitchen counter beside a stack of documents and a mug of untouched coffee. Her mother had been so young, barefoot, laughing, sleeves rolled up, with baby Camille on one hip and a planting shovel in the other hand. It wasn't just a snapshot. It was proof. Proof that this wasn't Everett's legacy. It had never been. She scanned the photo, enhanced it digitally, and matched it to an old local newspaper clipping she'd dug up from the town archive 2 days earlier. Young couple opens boutique vineyard in rural Charleston County. The article had originally framed the launch as a family dream between Everett and his spirited wife, the artistic visionary behind the vineyard's layout. But what struck Camille hardest was the quote at the end, from her grandfather. "I gifted this land to my daughter to keep the legacy alive. She has the touch for the soil, not him." The original land deed, signed by Camille's grandfather, had been buried under Everett's revisions. But now, she had an undeniable paper trail linking the land to her mother, and not to Everett. And the photograph? It time-stamped presence, intent, ownership. Tyler, meanwhile, was unraveling and didn't even know it. The gala photos had triggered whispers in the industry. One wine distributor called to cancel a deal, citing internal restructuring. A local reporter published a follow-up to the viral post, noting the discrepancy in Everett's public statements and records from the early 2000s. And then there was the notary. Jessa found her. She was 63 now, retired and slightly bitter. She'd signed the forged release years ago under pressure, thinking no one would ever check. She gave Jessa a written statement, and a recorded one, confirming that Everett had brought her the document already pre-signed by Camille's mother, long after she'd died. Black ink on a ghost's signature. Camille sat quietly in her godmother's sunroom as the attorney read over the stack of new evidence. "Jesus," the older woman whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't just inheritance fraud. This is criminal conspiracy, estate manipulation, and likely tax fraud." Camille looked out the window, where wind stirred the trees in the exact rhythm she remembered from childhood days playing under the vineyard's trellises. "I don't want to press charges," she said finally. Her godmother looked up. "What?" "I want him to keep standing, and then I want to cut the ground out from under him, slowly." The lawyer's eyes narrowed, impressed. "You're your mother's daughter." Camille launched the foundation a week later. The Landon Legacy Trust, a nonprofit committed to preserving small, independent vineyards started by women across the Southeast. It was named after her grandfather. The launch came with a press campaign. Interviews, photo features, old footage of her helping during harvests, even a snippet from the viral blogger who now referred to her as the quiet architect of the Charleston wine boom. She never once mentioned Everett or Tyler by name, but she didn't have to. The comparison did the talking for her. Then came the letter, delivered by courier to Everett's home. It contained no threats, no accusations, just 3 documents: a copy of the original land deed signed by Camille's grandfather, A notarized statement from the woman who had signed the fraudulent will transfer. A letter from Camille, written in that same sharp, clean hand Everett once praised when she was 12. Dad, I remember what you told me when I was 15, that the only thing more important than a man's reputation is the paper it's built on. I kept the papers. The Vineyard will remember my mother's name, whether you do or not. Camille ... Everett stared at the letter until his hands began to tremble. Across town, Tyler slammed his fist on the table after seeing the Trust's website. Who the hell does she think she is? He barked at Everett. Everett didn't answer. He was too busy rereading the line. The Landon Legacy Trust, named after the original owner of the Walsh Vineyard, Eleanor Landon. His wife's maiden name. Tyler was too foolish to understand, but Everett knew what this meant. Camille wasn't just reclaiming her mother's name. She was erasing his, and she wasn't doing it through the courts. She was doing it in the public's imaginations and the history books, in the way people remembered the land and the wine and the story behind it. And there was no lawsuit to fix that. Later that evening, Camille received a voicemail. It was from her father's assistant. Miss Walsh, Mr. Everett would like to meet with you, privately. He said he's willing to talk about a possible correction to the will, quietly. Camille listened to the message once. Then she deleted it. She wasn't interested in corrections. She was interested in truth, and truth didn't need permission. The Broken Glass Between Us, Part 4. A story of inheritance, secrets, and silent revenge. Everett Walsh didn't sleep the night Camille's letter arrived. He sat at the edge of his bed, the document clutched so tightly in his hands that the corners curled with sweat. He stared at the words like they were written in another language. But they weren't. They were hers. Calm. Precise. Inevitable. He called his attorney at 5:17 a.m. Camille has the deed and the notary statement. Silence. Then, we may be looking at a complete unraveling, Everett. If this goes public. It already is, Everett snapped. She's not suing. She's rewriting the narrative. And that terrified him more than a courtroom ever could. Meanwhile, Camille's next move wasn't a press release. It was a dinner. An invitation-only gathering at the old estate near the edge of the original vineyard, the parcel that had once belonged to her grandfather. She rented it for the night under her mother's maiden name. She invited former staff, vineyard workers, even a few small wine journalists who had followed the story quietly. No big media outlets, no flashing lights, just roots. She stood beneath the old oak tree with fairy lights strung overhead, a glass of the vineyard's 2012 vintage in her hand, the last year she had helped with harvest before she was pushed out. I wasn't supposed to speak tonight, she began, soft but steady. But I realized something. You all remember the vineyard as it was. Not what it became, not the brochure version, but the place where we bled and laughed and grew. Her eyes moved to the small crowd, older workers in linen shirts, a retired label designer, the son of the vineyard's first groundskeeper. I'm not reclaiming anything, she said. I'm restoring what was never supposed to be lost. And the applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was real. Jessa sat beside her later that evening, watching the final candles burn down. You've got them now, she murmured. The people, the truth, the proof. Camille sipped her wine and gave a small smile. Not all of them. Jessa turned. Tyler still thinks he's invincible, that he earned this, and he's hiding something. You said there were gaps in the financials? Jessa nodded. Noticed a few transfers from the vineyard's accounts to shell companies. Started about 6 months before your father revised the will. Camille's fingers tapped the stem of her glass. My guess? He convinced Everett to rewrite everything under the promise of streamlining. He's been siphoning money. Jessa's eyes glinted. You want to expose it? I want him to expose himself. She didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Tyler went on a local morning show, trying to do PR cleanup after the Landon Legacy Trust launch. He smiled for the camera, oozing confidence, dressed in a crisp navy suit he didn't pay for. Halfway through the interview, the host brought up the blog post. There's a lot of chatter online about your sister's contributions to the vineyard's early years. What do you say to that? Tyler scoffed. Camille was helpful, sure, but she wasn't involved in the business side. That's always been Dad and me. The vision, the expansion, that was us. Camille watched the clip on her laptop. Then she clicked open the financial audit Jessa had completed the night before. Tens of thousands funneled through a shell company tied to a renovation firm Tyler had hired for vineyard upgrades, but which never did the work. She picked up her phone. The next day, an anonymous file arrived in the inbox of a regional financial news outlet. Inside, spreadsheets, transfer logs, a timeline connecting Tyler Walsh to the false payments. An hour later, it was public. Son of vineyard tycoon linked to suspicious transactions. Investigators looking into embezzlement allegations. Everett's name was in the subheader. Not for glory, for cover-up. Camille walked into her mother's old apartment that evening, the light golden through the blinds. She sat on the floor beside the box of letters she hadn't finished reading. The one she opened next began with a question. Camille, when does love become silence? Her mother had written it during her final weeks, when the cancer had returned, and the silence between her and Everett had thickened into something brutal. She spoke about the vineyard, about Tyler's growing ego, about the way Everett slowly edged Camille out of family meetings and decision-making. He thought you were too much like me, the letter read. Too emotional, too principled, too observant. That terrified him. Camille folded the letter gently. She wasn't emotional. She was awake. 3 days later, the Vineyard's board, long assumed to be a formality of yes-men Everett installed, called for an emergency vote. Camille didn't attend. She didn't have to. Tyler was suspended pending investigation. Everett was asked to, temporarily, step down from all financial operations. Camille's godmother texted her 2 words, "It's working." But Camille knew this wasn't the climax. This was only the beginning of the reckoning, because she hadn't spoken publicly, not once. And the day she did, the world would hear everything. The Broken Glass Between Us, Part 5. A story of inheritance, secrets, and silent revenge. Everett Walsh sat at the far end of the long dining room table in silence, flanked by empty chairs. His world, once filled with applause, awards, and estate tours, had grown so quiet lately it felt like standing on a frozen lake. The board's decision to suspend him wasn't public yet, but the whispers had begun, and whispers were more dangerous than headlines. His phone buzzed, a voicemail from a council member. Everett, just a heads up, I'm stepping back from the Vineyard deal. There's too much noise around your family right now. He didn't return the call. Instead, he poured himself a rare glass of wine. It was the 2005 Syrah. Camille had picked those grapes herself, crying through the harvest after her mother's funeral. He didn't sip it. He just stared at the dark red swirl in the glass, a silent elegy to everything slipping through his fingers. Camille, meanwhile, was standing on stage at the Charleston Women in Business Forum. She wasn't a keynote. She wasn't even listed on the program. But one of the speakers, a vineyard owner from North Carolina, had invited her on stage during the Q&A. Camille, I think everyone here would love to hear how your family's vineyard inspired your new nonprofit. Camille hesitated for half a breath. Then she stepped forward. The room quieted as soon as she took the mic. I grew up in soil, she said. My grandfather taught me that the ground remembers more than people do. A soft ripple of laughter. My family's vineyard was my childhood. But when people rewrite stories to fit their version of legacy, they forget the roots. My mother was erased. I nearly was too. No names, no slander, just truth dressed in velvet. But legacy isn't what you leave in your will. It's what survives you, and what refuses to stay buried. She didn't say more. She didn't have to. The applause was thunderous. By the next morning, clips of Camille's impromptu speech were trending, not in a viral TikTok way, but in the circles that mattered, the wine industry forums, women-led business networks, estate law blogs. The tide wasn't just turning, it was rising. At the Vineyard, Tyler's life was unraveling like wet paper. The embezzlement investigation had exposed more than theft. It showed just how unqualified he had been all along. Records showed he'd outsourced decisions to consultants, siphoned funds into personal accounts, and lied on multiple expense reports. One document Camille uncovered, through a whistleblower accountant, revealed Tyler had taken out a secret loan using part of the Vineyard's land as collateral without Everett's full approval. It was risky, desperate, and now it was public. A local journalist got hold of the loan agreement. The headline the next day read, "Tyler Walsh bet the Vineyard and lost." Camille watched the fallout quietly. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't gloat. She didn't even return Tyler's calls, though he left 4 voicemails, each more frantic than the last. "Cam, you're not going to let this ruin me, are you?" "You don't understand the pressure Dad put on me. I was just trying to hold it together." "I made mistakes, okay? But you don't have to burn it all down." Her thumb hovered over the delete button. Then she pressed play again, just to hear the desperation in his voice once more. It sounded like justice. Jessa called later that week. "We have the final piece." Camille stood on her porch, overlooking the patch of ivy her mother once loved. "What is it?" "The original tax records, from the year the Vineyard turned profitable. Your mother's name is listed as a 50% owner, and her signature's there, verified, which makes the forged will not only fraudulent, but in direct contradiction with an active legal contract." Camille closed her eyes. "How long would a court case take?" 6 months, maybe more, but you wouldn't need to go to trial." "Why not?" "Because the moment Everett sees these, he'll settle. Quietly, he won't survive the press." That night, Camille laid out every document on the floor like puzzle pieces. Her mother's letters, the financial records, the forged will, the land deeds, the tax filings, the photo of her as a baby under the oak tree. At the center, she placed her mother's old journal, leather-bound, full of margins scribbled with thoughts about soil pH and grape varietals, and most heartbreakingly, future names for potential wine blends. One name stood out, Camille's Dawn. She wept for the first time in weeks, not from grief, but from memory. The following morning, she met Everett at a neutral location, a private conference room in an old Charleston hotel. He was grayer, smaller, but still proud. "I assume you didn't call me here for a reconciliation?" he said dryly. Camille sat across from him and laid down the folder. "This isn't revenge," she said softly. "It's restoration." He flipped through the pages. With each turn, his face sank, and then he paused. At the final photo, Camille holding her mother's journal beside the Vineyard, just days ago, standing in the exact spot her mother had 30 years earlier. "This will destroy us," Everett said, voice thin. "No," she replied, standing. "It will free us." She left the room before he could speak again. The broken glass between us. Final chapter. A story of inheritance, secrets, and silent revenge. The lawsuit never made it to court. 2 weeks after Camille handed Everett the evidence, his legal team reached out with a settlement. Quiet, desperate, and generous. They offered her the deed, not a buyout, not a share. The full deed to the original Vineyard lands, the heart of the estate that once belonged to her grandfather, then her mother, and never rightfully ever to Everett. In return, Everett requested one thing: silence. Camille didn't respond at first. She let the silence linger long enough for him to feel it, the kind of silence her mother had been buried under for years. Then she sent back her answer. "You may keep your reputation. I'll keep the land. The truth belongs to me now." The official documents were filed the following Monday. And just like that, with the stamp of a notary and a signature in Camille's own hand, the Vineyard Center passed into her name. Eleanor Landon's daughter. The story ran quietly, just a note in the business section, far from the front pages Everett had once graced. But that was how Camille wanted it. This wasn't for spectacle. It was for peace and power. Tyler left Charleston a month later. He sold his car, scrubbed his social media, and moved west. Rumor said he was looking into startup ventures in Oregon, wine adjacent, but never quite landing. No one in Charleston missed him. Everett stayed, but his world shrank. No board seats, no press calls. The Walsh name faded from event programs, replaced by newer, hungrier names. The old guard stopped calling. The community he tried to own turned its back, not with rage, but with polite forgetting. The final sting wasn't disgrace, it was irrelevance. Camille rebranded the original estate under a new name, Landon Grove. The first bottle under the new label released in spring, a crisp white blend her mother had dreamed of but never seen bottled. She called it Camille's Dawn. The label bore no crest, no signature, no legacy story, just a quiet phrase. Dedicated to those who were written out and wrote themselves back in. The Landon Legacy Trust continued to grow. With Camille at the helm, they funded 5 new women-led vineyards within the year. She was invited to speak at national wine conferences, her speeches quoted in trade journals, her face never on magazine covers but always mentioned with reverence. Not as Everett's daughter, not as Tyler's sister, just Camille, a woman who learned how to harvest silence and grow justice from it. One morning, months later, Camille stood under the old oak tree again. Alone this time, the vineyard behind her stretching green into the horizon. A breeze carried the smell of fresh soil and sun-ripened vines. She held her mother's journal in one hand, the final page bookmarked. Legacy is not the land. It's what you plant in its place. Camille knelt, pressed her hand to the earth, and closed her eyes. She didn't need revenge anymore. She had roots. And this time, no one could rip them out. The end checkmark.